Episode 28 of the NYY Recaps podcast, and for the first time, we're actually recapping something. We are just 3 days out from opening day. Finally, it looks like it might actually happen, but anything can happen as 2020 has shown us. Expect the unexpected. So if an asteroid hits between now and Thursday, it's been nice knowing you. So in this episode, it's going to be a bit more of a technical show. I'm going to talk a bit more about things like spin rates, exit velocities, different types of breaking ball, different types of swing path, things like that. So there are going to be some on-screen visual aids. So if you're listening to this on the podcast app, this might be a good one to turn into YouTube if you are watching on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the guy that we're all watching for this Thursday, Gerrit Cole. He signed that $324 million contract. I'm not sure how much it's going to be now that part of it has been lost to the coronavirus prorated salary situation, but I'm sure he's doing just fine. But I want to talk a bit about why he is so much better than other guys. I mean, other guys throw 100 plus miles an hour, but it's Gerrit Cole who's getting all this money, who's getting all these strikeouts. So I want to talk about somebody that you all know, or most of you know, Nathan Eovaldi. He pitched for the Yankees a few years back, had Tommy John surgery, actually 2 times he's had Tommy John surgery. He is now with the Red Sox, but he's a guy who could throw 102 miles an hour at times, and he pretty much sits at like 98 to 100 miles an hour. He is absolutely filthy. I think his average velocity for, 5 or 6 years was the best in baseball. But for some reason, a lot of times he gets hit like a piñata. And then you've got guys like Chad Green, who throw 95, 96 out of the pen. But for some reason, guys can't touch it. Chad Green strikes out a ton of hitters on his fastball. And the reason is one of the things that you may have heard of in baseball over the last few years, spin rate. So there's a website that I go to. It's called baseballsavant.mlb.com. And what it does is it takes all of the StatCast data that's been collected by those high-speed cameras and all the StatCast tools they have, and it represents everything in a visual way. And it ranks players based on other players compared in StatCast by their percentile. So you can see when you look at Nathan Eovaldi, he's in the 88th percentile of fastball speed, of velocity. So that means he throws harder than 87% of the league. His fastball spin, though, is just in the 45th percentile, which means he's below average. His strikeout percentage is just in the 53rd percentile, which means he's about middle of the pack. Same with his whiff percentage, swing and miss percentage. 56th percentile, and then his curve spin is just in the 12th percentile. This goes to show you that there's a lot more to getting swings and misses than velocity. It really does come down to spin. All right, so let's take a look at Chad Green. You can see that his exit velocity and his hard hit percentage are actually pretty bad, and his barrel percentage is pretty bad. That's because he throws pretty much nothing but fastballs, and we're going to talk about how he's fixing that. But if you look at his K percentage, his whiff percentage, and his fastball velocity and fastball spin percentage, they're all tremendous. His fastball velocity is in the 91st percentile, so slightly faster than Nathan Eovaldi. But his spin is in the 90th percentile, whereas Eovaldi was in the 45th percentile, which is why you see his strikeout percentage in the 91st percentile, so better than 90% of the league. And his whiff percentage, that's the amount that people swing and miss, is in the 76th percentile. So he's better than 3/4 of Major League Baseball. So let me explain spin rate, and I'm going to do a little visual demonstration here. This is a baseball, and this is a 4-seam fastball grip. So this is what Chad Green throws. You get basically 2 fingers, and they're touching the seams in 4 places. And when you release the ball, these 2 fingers come off of the ball like this, and they create spin. A 2-seamer is when you have fingers along both of these longer seams, or you can do a sinker, which is kind of in between the seams. That's how I like to throw mine, because it creates kind of a natural spitball if you're getting any kind of sweat or whatever, because you're not touching the seam, so it gets kind of slick right there, and it can create even more spin. But Chad Green throws basically a traditional four-seamer, and he throws pretty hard, 96, 97 miles an hour. But the problem is, when you throw it low in the zone as he was last year, or you don't have that great spin rate because your grip is off or your mechanics are off slightly, it can leave the ball right over the middle of the plate. It can make it kind of a meatball, which is why you saw early in the year he was getting clobbered, and he had to actually go down to AAA and work things out. But if you look at Gerrit Cole, he's an even better example of how you can combine spin rate and velocity to be effective. All right, so let's take a look at Gerrit Cole's 2019 MLB percentile rankings, according to StatCast and Baseball Savant. The thing that jumps out at me is his K percentage, or strikeout percentage, is 99%. His whiff percentage is 98%. He had over 300 strikeouts last year. I think it was 326. So the guy can miss bats. His fastball velocity is in the 96th percentile, and his fastball spin is in the 95th percentile. His curveball spin is in the 93rd percentile. So not only does he have great fastball velocity and spin, but he's got great curveball spin too, which is why you see his exit velocity in the 75th percentile as opposed to what Chad Green had, which was, if you recall, first percentile. So Chad Green gave up a lot of hard hit balls. Gerrit Cole does not. Where are you going with this, counselor? Well, the thing I wanted to bring up is looking at this data really helps you understand why the Yankees brought in Matt Blake. Matt Blake is the Yankees' new pitching coach, and he's going to try and teach a lot of the guys on this team, along with Gerrit Cole, how to increase their spin rate. You might remember a few years ago when the Astros traded for Justin Verlander. The Yankees were actually in on Justin Verlander too. They didn't want to ante up the money at that point, which if they did, they probably wouldn't have been able to get Gerrit Cole, just like the Astros weren't able to re-sign him. But Justin Verlander was having a mediocre season with the Tigers. His numbers were, he was about a 500 pitcher. He had an ERA over 4. And then I think he went 10-0 down the stretch, and he was dominant. And then he beat the Yankees in the postseason, and he's pretty much been dominant ever since. He won the Cy Young Award last year, beat out Gerrit Cole for it. He's aging, so at some point he's going to start to decline, but so far he's had that rubber arm. He hasn't had any problems. But one thing that you can attribute that to is that the Astros taught him how to use spin rate. Now, there's been people like Trevor Bauer who are saying that, the Astros pitchers were putting things on the ball. I don't buy that. I do think they were cheating with the sounds and the videos and all that stuff, but the baseball gets swapped out so much these days that it's really tough to doctor the baseball. So I think it just comes down to how they're using spin rate. And what Matt Blake has done is he's worked with Chad Green to develop a new slider. Now, we saw it a couple times in the inter-squad games, and it just wasn't great yet. He threw a couple of nice ones, but he also threw a couple of hangers. So it's going to be basically a lot more reps before he gets used to throwing it. Hopefully he won't be throwing it in games until he can do it successfully every time. But by next season, it should be tremendous. And keep in mind, Chad Green is only 29, so he's still got a long way to go in his career. And he's already one of the most dominant relievers in baseball. So I think you're going to see a transformation in Chad Green from great reliever to elite reliever. He might even already be an elite reliever, but he might go to that next level if he can pick up that spin rate on the breaking ball and miss a few more bats. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is Deivi Garcia. You may have seen the game last night. You may have seen my recap. Deivi Garcia made his Bronx debut, and there's been a lot of hype around Deivi Garcia. He started the Futures game last year, and he's just 21 years old. He's been compared to Pedro Martinez, but I gotta say, last night I left feeling underwhelmed. I mean, he was basically 92 to 93 with the fastball, which is not great these days. I mean, it used to be great. His curveball seemed to me to be a bit too loopy, a bit too big, a bit too slow. He did kind of have a cutter of sorts. It was 82, 83, but it didn't seem to move very much. And a cutter is more effective when it's thrown harder than that. I mean, guys who can throw a cutter 89, 90, then you've got an effective cutter. But if you throw an 82, 83 with a cutter, it's just not hard enough. He also seemed to be working on a changeup, which I got to admit, the changeup looked pretty good. The changeup was also about 82, 83, but had some sink to it, but he didn't have great command of it. Now, that's something that comes later on with repetition. So Deivi Garcia is obviously still working on things. It did concern me that his velocity was down. Now, maybe that is just a product of over the last few months he hasn't been able to throw as much. Keep in mind, he's a minor league pitcher, so he is not rich like a lot of these guys. I mean, I'm sure he has some bonus money left over, but he's not a guy who can have an indoor mound with a personal trainer who can come over and do all the safety precautions and stuff. He was probably throwing against a fence in his backyard or something like that to stay ready. But so maybe the velocity will come back. My buddy Tom, who I watch baseball with and who was a college pitcher, he mentioned that he thought that Deivi's arm was dragging a bit. I can see that. He throws across his body a lot. You know, he starts on the third base side of the rubber, and when he finishes up, his left leg, his land leg, is to the right of the rubber. So he throws really across his body, and that can cause your arm to drag. It can cause shoulder problems too, so he needs to be careful. But, you know, Deivi needs some time in the oven to bake a little longer. So if Masahiro Tanaka has to miss his first start in the rotation, and the Yankees do need a fifth starter, then I think you got to go with Clarke Schmidt. I think he's the man. I think he's earned it. I think he's been fantastic. So that would put it at the opening rotation as Gerrit Cole, James Paxton. I'd go with Jordan Montgomery, number 3, because I think he's been fantastic. And then Jay Happ, number 4. And then Clarke Schmidt, number 5. So that's the way I would go it if I were managing the team. If this were MLB The Show, that's what I would go with. But I think you'll see Tanaka back in there before too long. And I think you'll see Clarke Schmidt pitch out of the bullpen. He's ready. He is for sure ready. His fastball has been very accurate, mid-90s. His breaking ball is sharp. It's downward. He's going to miss bats. And he seems to have poise. He seems to have confidence. And Gerrit Cole has taken him under his wing, as I mentioned in the previous podcast. So, yeah, good news for Clarke Schmidt. I think he's going to make a difference this year.
High fly ball, deep right field. There it goes. See ya, tie game. A pinch hit home run for Mike Ford, and it's 2-2.
So Mike Ford is for real. I've been a Mike Ford advocate since last year, and I saw him in person at the Durham Bulls Park last year. He's, you know, he doesn't look like an athlete. He's thick with 2 C's. But this guy hits with a lot of backspin. You know who else hit with a lot of backspin? Greg Bird. Now, towards the end of his tenure with the Yankees, he didn't really hit anything because after he tore his labrum, he couldn't catch up with a fastball anymore. He's with Texas now, and I wish him the best of luck. But he would hit the same kind of home runs, those long, high fly balls. Babe Ruth used to do that. Mickey Mantle used to do that. Ted Williams would do that. Lefties who hit with a certain path can create a really nice backspin on the ball, which creates long, high fly balls to right field. Now, it also creates, if you miss, a lot of ground balls to the right side. But what Mike Ford does better than a lot of guys is he uses the left side of the field. I've seen him take balls down the left field line. I've seen him hit balls towards left center field. And I think that's something that he may have picked up from Brett Gardner, because Brett Gardner has that nice slice to the opposite field. So, you know, another instance of a veteran helping a young guy. Mike Ford is going to hit. You know, I don't know what kind of athlete he's going to be long term. He's kind of a bigger guy, as I mentioned. He doesn't run real well. From what I've seen, he's an average defender. But he can hit. And in the major leagues, if you're left-handed and you can hit, or if you can pitch, really, basically if you can play, they're going to find a spot for you somewhere. Now, the Yankees are probably going to keep him on the roster this year because they're going to need, you know, somebody there to back up Luke Voit. He's coming off of surgery. He's kind of blocked Mike Ford. But Mike Ford is going to get a chance. And it might not be with the Yankees. They may have to deal him. But he's such a good hitter that it wouldn't surprise me if they're able to get something substantial for him, even as kind of, you know, a slow, young first baseman. He might have some value just because of the amount of home runs that he can hit, basically. And every team is looking for those guys who can bash the ball out of the ballpark. Now, if you go to the Baseball Savant page for Mike Ford, you'll see that his numbers are actually pretty good too. You can see that Mike Ford has a higher barrel percentage. That's the amount of time that you hit the ball off of the barrel of the bat than Major League Baseball. So Mike Ford had a 9.6 barrel percentage compared to 6.3 in Major League Baseball at large. His exit velocity was 91.9 miles an hour. That's very good. Major League average was 88.2. Another guy I'm excited about that has great exit velocity, Giancarlo Stanton. We didn't get to see him much last year because he was hurt pretty much all year. Saw him a bit in the postseason, then he gets hurt again. This year he gets hurt in his first spring training game, and everybody's laughing at him basically, saying, what is with this guy? But it looks like he's going to be the DH, and, that should take some pressure off of his legs, not having to run around in the outfield and collide with walls and things like that. And you see, just by the way he's making contact in these exhibition games, he had the double the other night, then he hit the massive Stantonian blast, 448 feet. Stanton looks like he's locked in, and so does Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge has been killing the ball. 3 home runs in 2 games. He's hitting them to left field. He's hitting them to right field. If you remember last year, he didn't pull a home run for like the first 50 games or something like that, probably because of that oblique problem. Now, hopefully this means that his oblique is 100% healed. I think it is. His upper right rib, his top right rib on his right side, is apparently healed. He had the collapsed lung, which has healed. So Aaron Judge could be ready to put on a show. And it's a shame that we won't get to see what his numbers would look like over 162 games this year. But it would not surprise me if he puts up 20 or 25 home runs in 60 games. And since I'm making predictions, I just wanted to go through and say there's a couple guys that I think are going to be big factors this season that we didn't really consider big factors last year. One of them is going to be Jordan Montgomery. I talked a bit about him on the Game Day show either yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. But he has looked dominant to me. He really has. And it would not surprise me if the Yankees get to the postseason if you see him getting one of the starts, because guys who can make you swing and miss are extremely valuable. And he has a higher chase rate than pretty much any pitcher in Major League Baseball. So Jordan Montgomery is my pick to click as a sleeper pick for the 2020 season. And one other guy that I think could be a big factor that we're not really talking about is J. Happ. J. Happ, when he first got to the Yankees, was very, very good down the stretch. Got off to a bit of a rough start last year, put it together towards the end of the year, but he's been sharp in both spring training and the intra-squad games. Spotting his pitches, he's up to 94, 95 miles an hour. He's another guy with a high spin rate, which is something the Yankees obviously like to have as a characteristic for their pitchers. So J. Happ, I think he's going to have a bounce-back year. That gives the Yankees a very strong rotation with Gerrit Cole, eventually Masahiro Tanaka, and then 3 left-handed pitchers, James Paxton, Jordan Montgomery, and J. Happ. The Yankees are set up. All right, thanks for joining. As always, like and subscribe. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on all that stuff. And I will see you on opening night.